Hi, everybody. This is Julissa. Thank you so much for coming back and listening to my podcast. I hope everybody's having a great end of the month. Where this is the last week in February 2023. It feels like it was just yesterday. We were celebrating Christmas, and that's how life is. You have to live every moment. Time goes by so fast, and if you have an opportunity to do something, man, do it in the moment. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about and something that happened to me, which is a very peculiar, unique type of story. And before you hear it out there by somebody else, some type of, who knows, an imposter or somebody who can probably heard it from the person himself. I wanted to come here and set the record straight and say it myself because this actually happened to me, right? And in case you didn't know, I am a fashion designer. I fashion has been my thing, I guess you can say, since I was very young. I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and in the Dominican Republic, when I was very young, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a fashion designer since a very young age. And because of that, I have said many times, a very well-known designer in my country, where I was born, is Oscar de la Renta. And because of that, and being so aware of myself when I was younger that I wanted to do fashion, like my cousins will jokingly will say to me, "You are Oscarita now," and that was the joke, for a while because they knew I wanted to do fashion, and Oscar de la Renta was very famous. So, you put people like him on a pedestal, I guess you can say, because when you see somebody who's basically doing everything that you want to do when you get older, you're like, it's almost like it can become easily an idol worship type of thing. Thank God it didn't get that serious with me. All I'm saying that for the Dominican culture, the Dominican um, people, Oscar de la Renta achieved, a lot of stuff, and it made us all very proud of what he did in the fashion world, right? And because of that, you admire him, especially if you want to be a fashion designer. So he was one of the person that I admire, his work. I didn't know what Oscar de la Renta did on his personal life, and that's the thing that we, as people living here, Christ believing people, we need to understand that before you go out and idolize singers, celebrities, and things like that, always remember there's a difference between liking somebody's work and liking who they are as a person. There's people that do a lot of, you know, things behind closed doors, secret things, right? And that's why you have to disconnect the two and do not fall into idol worship. Okay. And it was very important for me to start by saying something like that, right? Because once we like a celebrity, once we like somebody who has achieved a lot of great things, we tend to overlook all the bad stuff. And that's not a good thing either, right? So, said that, I want to say, Oscar de la Renta to me was an amazing designer, somebody who, like I said, I admire for a very, very long time. And I admire how he kept his Dominican roots alive. He wasn't like Americanized, but he was like very down to earth too. And I love the way he spoke Spanish, very Dominican style Spanish, and I really appreciated that. And I remember, I will never forget one time, before I told you the story, what happened with me when I met him. One time I remember it was like Fashion Night Out when it first began in 2012 or something like that, and I was watching a live somewhere. I don't even know if it was Twitter or somewhere. And I remember him. He had a very well-known merengue band in his fashion boutique in New York City. And I said to myself, "Are you kidding me? This is Oscar de la Renta, high fashion luxury designer, very well known, and he has on his fashion night out event, he has Pochi Family and Coco Band, which is a very typical band over there in my country, and he had all these people in this boutique dancing merengue, and I was like, "Are you? This is amazing." He's very he doesn't forget where he came from. And it was just so crazy to me to see that he's there dancing merengue with this woman, the high socialite of New York City, dressed up in Oscar de la Renta. There they are dancing merengue because that's where Oscar is from. So I would never forget watching that. But anyways, so you can imagine, a lot of you guys know that I am based in Connecticut, and that's where my family, when we came to from the Dominican Republic, we after New York City, I think a lot of people end up in New York City first, and then, we came and we moved here to Connecticut after 6 months living in the Bronx because my mom couldn't find work. My dad didn't have room for us. They were already separated. So moving, my mom, like our uncle lived here in Connecticut, and my mom said, I can't find work. The school years is coming. I don't know what to do. It's been already 6 months. This is not really working out. He said, come here to Connecticut. Come check it out. You guys can stay, for a weekend. And of course, the weekend turned into 8 months living in my uncle's home, which that's a whole story in itself. But eventually, we ended up having our own apartment. Thanks be to God for that. But I guess, every immigrant family that comes here with nothing will have a story similar to mine, right? But what I'm saying is that coming to Connecticut was such a last unexpected event that happened to us. We never, when we left the Dominican Republic, we never imagined that we were ended up living in Connecticut. And it's just, that's how life is, right? That's why I say, life is so unpredictable. You have to live in the moment, guys. You just never know, right? We actually, I remember my mom planning our coming, to this country. She had a really good job and everything in the Dominican Republic, and I remember her having conversations with my dad, and how the plan was going to be. And me, I was 11 years old. I wanted to know what was the plan. I had come and visit New York, and I loved it, but I had never, vacation destinations sometimes are good for a moment, and then you're ready to go home. I love New York City. I love everything, but I'm like, how are we gonna live here? So my mom is like, your dad is saying that he has an apartment for us, and then I'll do this, and my brother is gonna help and this and the other. And the minute we hit JFK, every plan went downhill from there. I remember the same day that we came to New JFK in New York. It was nighttime, I remember, and my dad came with us. He basically brought us, right, and he brought us, flow. He came with us in the flight, and then he had somebody wait for him at the airport, and he disappeared. And thanks be that my mom had already planned some of her cousins and brothers to pick us up from the airport, and they gave us a ride to my my mom's cousin's home, which so unexpected, so last minute. Here we are coming here to this apartment that was non-existent. And I will never forget, and I know I'm going a little off topic a little bit, but I will never forget seeing my dad leave that airport with somebody else, and we're just standing there looking like, oh, there he's leaving. He was supposed to bring us to this new apartment that he had saved for us in the Bronx, but apparently that never happened. There was no apartment. There was no deposit that that they agreed upon. There was nothing. And after 6 months of sleeping in people's, you know, living rooms and stuff like that, one cousin this week, the other cousin the next week, my mom, she called her brother here in Connecticut, and he's like, come by, we'll check it out. Maybe you can get some type of job or something. And that's how we ended up in Connecticut, right? So the reason that I'm bringing that up is that after I find out, years passed by, all of that, I knew I wanted to be a fashion designer, right? And I was gonna do every step I needed to take to make my dream come true. I already knew what I wanted to do. I just wanted to get ahead and get started, right? And everybody would say to me, you gotta go to New York, this and the other. So eventually when I found out, right, after going to school and everything for fashion, and going even to Italy for to study fashion, When I found out that Oscar de la Renta actually lives right here in Connecticut, but I mean, obviously back then, because he did pass away. But I'm like, he lives right here, and he just doesn't live like an hour away from where I was living in Danbury. He is basically like 30 minutes from where my house was in Danbury, right? So that was a big shocker for me because I was like, what? This person that idolize, not idolize basically, but I admire for so many years, who is doing everything that I wanted to do. He lives 30 minutes away from my house. And that's sometimes, we in our own mind, we make the world so small when it actually is not, right? So he had a house right here in Kent, Connecticut. And once you start talking to people about fashion and things like that, in Connecticut around Danbury, the people will say to you, "Oh yeah, my cousin works in Oscar de la Renta's house. He does the grass for him, or he's a cook in his home, or I know somebody who knows somebody who works at Oscar de la Renta's house up in Kent." Are you kidding me? He's so like, he's not this person that you see on TV that's kind of hard to reach, that only like highlight people can, have a conversation with him. This is actually, he's down, up the hill, up in Kent somewhere, and it's not that hard, right? And it was just such a shocker to me to learn that. And then what happened was that, I eventually, um, everybody like when I graduated college and got a job in retail, right? um I eventually ended up going to, one of my friends was like, why don't we do this, right? Everybody knew that I struggled to get a job in New York City, right? So everybody will come up with these crazy ideas, try to help me out. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, Oscar de la Renta doesn't owe me anything, okay? Just because he's from the Dominican Republic, that doesn't mean that he needs to give me an opportunity. And that's another thing, right? The minute you hear somebody who's, at least this is a very like Dominican culture type of thing, right? Just because we came from the same place and we speak the same language and perhaps might have the same similar stories, doesn't mean that that you're gonna be hired by them. Doesn't mean that they owe you a job. Doesn't mean that they're gonna help you immediately. Like, I don't understand, sometimes we make these ideas in our heads, and once you understand that nobody owes you anything, then maybe you keep yourself grounded a little bit and live in reality. Okay. But I know back then, people were just trying to help me out. Like, I had so many people come with different ideas how I should show up at his house in Kent, Connecticut, and bring my resume to him, or like walk around Kent, Connecticut trying to find him. And when you are desperate to work in the fashion industry, crazy ideas like that, like, they kind of make sense. And before you know it, when an idea in your mind makes sense, before you know it, there you are driving around Kent, Connecticut like a loser, trying to find Oscar de la Renta. Like, can you imagine, like, famous people? Not every famous people who walks around their neighborhood doing regular human, like regular things that people do, going to the laundry, going to the supermarket, whatever. The last thing they want is another person to show up and be like, "Oh, here's my resume. I'm waiting for you to hire me." Like, who does that, right? But like I said, in life, a lot of the times we ideas come to us and we think they are the best idea, and you know, sometimes we find out the hard way that they were not really that smart, right? So once everything gets planned out, right? So after much thought, one summer day, me and my friend decided this is the perfect time to do that. And this is what happened to me, right? So we decided to go after work, I remember making sure I dressed up very nicely that day. I'm like, okay, let's go drive around Kent because we're gonna find Oscar de la Renta's house today, and we're gonna see if he's outside or he's somewhere in the porch or something, right? That was the whole master plan idea by myself, which is very quite disturbing once you look at it this now after so many years. So I was like, let's just go, right? It's a beautiful summer day. I mean, by the way, though, I have to say this: I love Connecticut, and Kent, Connecticut is beautiful. Like, it's one of those places that you just really want to drive around. I'm not recommending anybody to go drive around trying to find where Oscar de la Renta's home was, but I'm saying that, you know, if we, when the idea was, if I didn't even see him, it was still such a beautiful day because Kent is beautiful, right? One time, you can be driving on down the road and then you see horses and things like that. You see a beautiful valley in the mountains and it's beautiful. So it's a beautiful town. But anyway, so we decided to go, right? Like I said, it was a beautiful summer day, perfect weather, not too hot, not too cold. You know, I don't even know what month was it, but I remember it was very nice. So we're driving around, right? And we have the address of Oscar de la Rente's home. How do you find the address? That's a really good question, right? Because there's something called Google, right? And it will be, I searched it. I'm like, this is probably it. Anything that sounds, you just put his name and, you put the plus sign and you put Kent, Connecticut. Eventually you will find some type of address that will lead you that way, right? So we take and right and go, right? And it took us like a long time. We're driving around Main Street. We're finding this place, but it's so crazy because they're smart enough to not publish, excuse me, their correct address. So it would lead us to this place, which is kind of like a very off-road type of entrance. And we're like, this is probably, yeah, it's probably right here. But it looks very wooded, secluded area, which, very expected. He's a celebrity designer, right? So I'm like, okay. I was like, all right. Um, how are we gonna get up there? It's not a good idea. That's how when I knew. It took for me to get there to figure out this is not really a good idea, right? So then we're like, okay, whatever. We're tired of driving around, even though it's beautiful. Let's just get out of here. So we go down to Main Street in Ken, and we hit this ice cream place, right? And we're like, oh, let's check out some of the shops and maybe go in before they close, type of take a look around, whatever, and see, maybe we'll ask some of the people, the locals there, right? Because now this becomes an investigation, I guess. So we're like, let me get out the store. I walk into the store, which is like an ice cream shop. I remember it had like a gift shop behind it. Very old country looking type of store. And I'm like, okay, I don't want any ice cream. So I'm looking, around, and they're like, okay, you guys need any help, right? And I was like, yeah, everything is so nice here. But I was gonna ask you, um, do you know where Oscar de la Renta lives? And they're like, oh yeah, they live up this way and this and the other. Is you guys having an event today or something? And we're like, no. Um, We're like, no, we just wanted to know. They're like, do he know who you are? And we're like, oh no, no, they don't know who we are at all. Like, this could have been ended up so bad, right? For me to be saying things like that, such a bad idea because safety concerns could have been an issue too. Like, what was I thinking? And don't think that I was like 17, 18 years old who didn't know anything. I was all the way out of college, all the way working for retail for so many years already. And it's just in my head, like, sometimes you think things are the right things to do, and you're like, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? But eventually we were like, no, no, no. We were just wondering, we're not from around here. We just wanted to see, we just wanted to meet him. And they're like, okay, well, he is expecting you or not? We're like, oh no. It was so crazy because it's almost like she knew the family because she was asking us a lot of questions, right? Anyways, so what happened was that summer day that we never saw him, right? And thank God, looking back at it now, I'm like, oh my goodness, thank you, Jesus, that that never happened, right? Because, it could have, and it's not the right approach to things like that. It's just not the right approach to find somebody's address. If you are invited to somebody's home, you don't need to go. You don't need to find their address on the internet. You will have it, and you are a complete stranger to them. He's a celebrity. What are you doing? But anyways, before I tell you what happened, so I want to say this, right? God's God's timing is always perfect, and things happen for a reason. And there's no such thing as coincidence. There's a perfect time for everything. And a lot of the times, we as humans, we want things our way, and we want it today. We don't want to wait yesterday. God will give you something when you're ready to receive it, right? And that's why I don't like this whole idea when people say you gotta manifest what. I don't want to get myself in trouble, trying to create something that God doesn't think I'm ready for. God doesn't see me, God doesn't want me to do that. God doesn't want me to go for it yes yet, right? Or I'm not ready for it. Or it's not for me, right? So one cold morning in October, I remember, I'm in New York City, right? Dressed up for a job interview for a huge department store that was looking for like entry level designer, right? Here I am trying to knock on doors again, and I have the biggest portfolio you can imagine. I was carrying the biggest portfolio. I'm wearing heels, wearing a suit. I'm dressed up for an interview, and in the other hand, I had my umbrella because it was raining. It was a cold. It's like October is a rainy, cold month, and here it happens a lot of like 90% of the time every season. So here I am passing through, I left Grand Central. I'm coming down, towards Times Square, turn on Bryant Park, trying to get to Fashion Avenue, right? And I'm just coming here. I'm turning down, and I know it was not Fashion Week. No, it was not. It was October, so Fashion Week is September. So I remember coming down, turning there on Bryant Park, going down towards Fashion Week, and I'm standing there waiting for the light to change. Right, I'm waiting for the hand to come up. The little guy walking to come up on the traffic light so that I can cross the street, across the way, so I can continue going towards Fashion Avenue. And here comes Oscar de la Renta, and he stands next to me. Like, are you kidding me? And just as I said right now, are you kidding me? I turned around and I said, wow, I was so shocked. It was the shock of my life. I will never forget that encounter. And I was like, wow, Oscar de la Renta. I went crazy. I started talking to him, and he just turned around like, who are you? And but he wasn't like mean. He was very like well composed. This man was sharp, right? He was dressed up head to toe sharp. He looked like, I dressed mannequins for a long time at Brooks Brothers, so he looked like one of my mannequins, like sharp. There was nothing flawless about his look. Like there was nothing like wrong. I remember he was wearing like a blue suit, the hair slicked back, the hand in his pocket like he's posing or something. And he was accompanied by this young, not young, but like by this light skinned guy who was more surprised at my reaction than Oscar de la Renta. Oscar de la Renta is like, he's just looking at me like smiling. And I said, I talked to him in Spanish. I said, lo admiro desde que era muy pequeña. He's like, muchas gracias, muchas gracias. He kept saying, thank you very much. I said to him, I admire you since I was a young person, like a young girl in the Dominican. I said to him very fast, right before we crossing the street. I said to him, I admire you so much. I'm here in New York for a job interview, like, and I kind of like do the motion, like, look at my portfolio, like I'm holding it. And he's like, oh, that's very nice. And then I will never forget the guy that was with him just looking at me like, wow, she's so surprised to see him. And Oscar de la Gente is very composed. He's like, I get this all the time type of look. But he was very like he was giving me his attention, which I appreciated. And even though like I didn't get to shake his hand, nothing like that, my hands were full. And in that moment, when you're meeting somebody like you've seen all your life, you don't think to be like, okay, let's just put the portfolio aside, let me shake his hand, nothing like that. And to be honest, he had both his hand in his pocket. So things happen for a reason too, right? So whatever, right? I remember I had the umbrella and it wasn't like raining pouring. It was just, a little thing, right? And I had the portfolio in the other hand, and I'm talking to him, telling him everything that I can super fast. And then, like I said, the man that was with him was like, so surprised at me, and he kept smiling and saying, and like just trying to understand everything that I was saying. Excuse me, that I was saying, because I was saying it so fast. But after that, right, eventually it's our time to cross the street, right? So here we are, we're crossing the street. He's walking in front of me with this man that he had that's walking with him side by him. And I saw something that I will never forget. And it was very shocking for me because as I'm giving them, I don't want them to think that I'm following them, right? It's not Kent, Connecticut, right? But anyways, I'm like, let me let him take the lead, right? So he's walking in front of me, and this man is limping. And I was like, oh my gosh, why is he limping? And he's limping, and he has both his hands in his pockets, on each pocket, right? And I'm like, he's limping. And I thought, I'm like, oh man, I didn't even know he was sick. And, you guys, I was on my way to a job interview, so I'm like, okay, which way do I have to go now? And we went one block. They're in front of me. We went that next block, and then I went the other way, right? Because I was going to the job interview, and that was basically it, right? And I was like, wow. I didn't know that he was sick, number one, but I'm so happy that I got to meet him, right? It was just so interesting. And it's almost like I felt that day that God gave me that because, here's the thing. God, God knows my desire, right? And God knows, the Bible says, how is it that you being bad know how to give good gifts to your kids? Imagine your father in heaven, right? Like the year after that, right? Because that was October. I think the year after that, because October 2014, he passed. Oscar de la Renta died. And it's like, wow, I got to actually meet him. And I have a very crazy story on how I met him. I met Oscar de la Renta at a traffic light, right, in New York City. And then I have the other story about me driving around Kent, Connecticut, thinking that I was going to see him then, that I was going to walk up to his house and be like, hey, you're Dominican, I'm Dominican too, and we love fashion, let's work together. Like, God knows, it's always so hard to describe it. All I'm saying is, everybody, right? Everything comes at a perfect timing for, if you believe God for something, you have to trust and obey. And God wanted to give me that moment with Oscar de la Renta for me. Maybe not with my other friend, not with people trying to drop my resume at his house, nothing like that. He wanted me to have this story which is so unique, right? So unique. Imagine if my story was like, oh yeah, I showed up in his house one day in Kent, Connecticut, and he called the cops on me and my friend, and then I got trespassed or something, right? God wanted me to have that special story with Cal de la Renta, and you know, he also wanted me to like, I saw that he obviously was sick. So it's almost like I didn't even know that he was sick. And then we learned a year after he actually died of cancer. So it's just things like that that you're thankful for God that even though he died like a year after that, that like I have such a special story about him, and I admire, like I said, his work. I admire his tenacity. And I remember saying to him one thing. I remember specifically saying to him, I said, Dios le bendiga. And he kept saying to me, muchas gracias. I said, God bless you. And he said, thank you very much. So that's Miss Oscar de la Renta story at the traffic light. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming back to my podcast and listening. I hope everybody has a great end of February. God bless.